Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. I am your host, Antrice Wood. And if you have been listening for a while, welcome back. And if you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. Savvy Painter podcast is the podcast for artists who want practical, tactical tips to create a meaningful art practice that is both fulfilling and supports you. So picture this. You're standing in your studio, brush in hand, completely focused on the canvas in front of you. You make a brushstroke. Maybe it's a highlight on the cheek or a shadow under a tree or a simple line, and it just doesn't go as intended. So what happens next? In most cases, there's an immediate internal response, like, you messed it up. How could you be so stupid? Why did you do that? Great. Now you've totally ruined the painting. But here's what I want you to think about. This is self-aggression over a brushstroke. I want you to really think about that for a minute. Self-aggression over a brushstroke. So let me ask you something, and I want you to be really, really honest with yourself. Would you ever talk to another artist this way? If a fellow painter made that exact same mark, would you look at them and say, oh my God, you are such an idiot? Of course not. You'd probably say something like, hey, what if we tried this other approach? Or, hey, that's an interesting texture. Let's see where it takes us. Where do we want to go next with this? So if that's the way that we would treat another painter, another friend of ours, why do we accept this kind of treatment from ourselves? And more importantly, what is this kind of treatment costing us creatively? Today, we're diving deep into something that is happening in studios everywhere, but I don't think anyone's really talking about it. It's subtle, it's automatic, and it's absolutely devastating to our creative growth. So let's just start by getting clear on what self-aggression actually looks like, because it's so subtle. We don't even recognize it's happening half the time. Here's what it sounds like in the studio. It's the voice that immediately says, you screwed up, instead of what happened there. It's calling yourself names when your color mixing goes wrong, like, I'm such an idiot, I will never get skin tones right. It's feeling genuinely angry at yourself for, quote unquote, wasting materials on experiments. It's that internal punishment that you dish out whenever you take a creative risk that doesn't land the way that you hoped it would. And here's the thing that makes this so insidious. We've been doing it for years, so it feels completely normal. We even disguise it as having like high standards or pushing ourselves to be better. But I want to be really, really clear on this. This is something completely different from constructive self-evaluation. There is a world of difference between saying, this color isn't working for what I'm trying to achieve, let me try a different approach, and saying, I'm terrible at color, I always mess this up. Why can't I see straight? I see this a lot. I see this constantly in Grow Studio. So let me share a couple of examples. So there's Leslie, who had what she called an auction spiral when one of her pieces didn't sell. And instead of getting curious about what actually happened in the moment, she immediately jumped to shame. And she started thinking, my work isn't good enough. I'm not a real artist. I should have done something different. Nobody's buying my work. This is going to be embarrassing, like all of this stuff, right? And in that moment, in that little window, it was awful. It was terrible, because imagine really saying that and thinking about that to yourself. She later realized that she had the wrong day for the auction, that she was scrolling on her phone and hitting refresh, and the auction wasn't even until the next night. But what she realized, and why I am so freaking proud of her. She noticed that she was in a spiral. And I know this sounds small on the surface, but it is huge. And because this is the key. Normally, we believe the spiral, whatever spiral we are in, we absolutely believe it. We take it as fact and we take it as a reality. But Leslie had the awareness to recognize, hey, hang on a second. This is a pretty shitty thought loop that I'm stuck in. Regardless of what was happening in the auction, by the way, the next night, the painting did sell. But regardless of what is happening externally, we have a choice about how we will show up for ourselves. And by just noticing that she was in a spiral, Leslie gave herself that opportunity. That's why I'm so proud of her, because just noticing it is so difficult because this stuff is just in our heads and we don't even know that it's there. So the opportunity to decide on purpose and with intention how she will treat herself is the gift that Leslie gave herself. So another example, I want you to think about how many of us start critique sessions by dismissing our work. We walk up to show our work or we pop it up online and immediately start apologizing for it, right? Like, I was going to do this and I know this is terrible, but here's the thing, right? This didn't turn out how I wanted. I'm sorry. I know this isn't very good, but blah, 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 blah. This is self-aggression, plain and simple. And it's happening everywhere. It's happening in all of our studios. Why do we do this to ourselves? Where does it come from? A lot of it is cultural programming that starts very, very early. Many of us went through art education that focused heavily on mistakes rather than exploration. Like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is off, this is off. We learned to see our work through the lens of what was wrong with it instead of what we could discover from it. There's this persistent myth in our culture that artists should suffer for their art, that struggle and self-punishment are somehow necessary for authentic creative expression. We have confused perfectionism with professionalism, thinking that being really, really hard on ourselves is going to make us a more serious artist. And then there's this vulnerability factor, because creating art is inherently vulnerable. We're literally making something from nothing. We're putting our inner world onto a canvas and saying, hey, look at this. What do you think? When what we create doesn't match our vision, it often feels like a personal failure. And self-attack starts to feel like protection from external criticism. So the logic goes like this. If I criticize myself first, maybe it won't hurt as much when somebody else criticizes me or when somebody else judges me. That's the logic fallacy that a lot of us have. And then there's also what I call the control of illusion. We tell ourselves, if I'm hard enough on myself, then maybe I will do better next time. We're trying to use internal punishment as behavior modification. And what we're doing is we're confusing self-criticism with self-improvement, but they are not the same thing at all. Not even close. Okay. Some of you might remember in my Create Spiral that it was this podcast series that I did recently. And if you haven't heard it, it's fine. You can look it up later. But I emphasize curiosity. So curiosity is the C in the word create. It's the foundation of everything, because curiosity opens up possibilities and criticism shuts them down. So we want curiosity over criticism as much as humanly possible. So now let's talk about what this self-aggression is actually costing us, because the price is so much higher, I think, than most artists realize. First, it completely destroys our willingness to take creative risks. I mean, think about this logically. If failure equals punishment, why would you ever take creative risks? This leads us to create safe, predictable work that doesn't challenge our growth. We become afraid of experimentation because the cost of messing up feels high. Or if we do experiment, we cut it short. So we'll do just enough to kind of scratch that itch, but we won't take it deep enough to really, really learn something. Self-aggression also transforms our studio environment. Instead of being a safe place for exploration, our sanctuary, our studio becomes a place of potential punishment. And this affects how often we will paint. It affects how long our painting sessions are. And it affects what subjects that we're even willing to attempt. So let me give you a thought experiment that I call the 100 painting scenario. And I talked about this with Growth Studio last week, and it led to this whole thing, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But just imagine that you commit to creating 100 paintings. And then let's say that none of those 100 paintings are going to turn out the way that you expected. With self-aggression, each one becomes evidence of your failure. Each one is going to compound on the last one to create a mounting dread of this work that you're creating. And you'll start each painting kind of already anticipating disappointment. But without self-aggression, each one becomes information. It becomes a launching point. It becomes a point of curiosity. It becomes like this place of awe and wonder of like, ooh, that happened. I didn't expect that. I wanted this thing to happen, but this other thing happened. I wonder what I can do with that, right? Each one builds resilience and each one teaches you something new. The long-term career impact of that is enormous. Just think about this for a second, right? Because self-aggression affects your willingness to show your work. It affects your willingness to enter competitions, to try new venues. It impacts your pricing confidence. If you think that your work is bad, then how will you be able to charge appropriately for it? How will you be able to confidently say, hey, this is my painting. It costs this much money. Do you want to buy it? Right. And that's kind of like my short code for what we need to do to sell a painting. You are very unlikely to use those exact words, but that's the conversation that we need to have. Look at this. Here's how much it costs. Would you like this in your home? Do you want to buy it? Right. So you're not going to be able to do that very well if you think that your work is bad, or you'll stumble over the price, or you won't even want to show your painting as something that anyone would be willing to buy. Self-aggression also influences your ability to teach. How can you guide students through processes that you attack yourself for? And this is really important because a lot of artists use teaching as a way to diversify our income. And here's the thing, this is what really gets me. We are essentially microaggressing ourselves all day long in our own studios. And so we've created an internal environment that is hostile to creativity. And then we wonder why creating feels so hard. It's like we have the worst boss in the world, and we're supposed to walk into our studios and have fun and be creative. We make it really, really difficult on ourselves. So what's the alternative? There is an alternative. It's very simple in concept, but it takes practice. And that is curiosity over criticism. So instead of that immediate thought of, I messed this up, we train ourselves to ask, what happened there? How can I stay present with this work? What do I want to take from this? Instead of thinking or saying out loud to ourselves, this is terrible, this sucks, we can say, okay, this isn't what I intended. What do I want to do instead? Where can I go next? What can I learn from this? Instead of thinking something like, I just wasted all these materials, we can recognize that we gathered all of this really valuable information. So again, I want to share some real examples from some of my challenge participants. And I've kind of picked a couple that will give different interpretations, different thought processes. So Megan had created a supply list for her students. She's an artist who teaches, right? So she created a supply list for her students, and the cost of all of those supplies when she added up was much higher than she expected. And her initial instinct was to think like, oh my gosh, I'm pushing this too hard. It was kind of like this microaggression against herself. It was kind of like an attack on herself for the expense of these materials. But instead, she stayed curious about how her students would respond. And it turns out they were excited. That curiosity led to insights about the value that she was providing. We had this whole conversation about it. It was great. But that's an example of, you can see if Megan had stayed on that thought process, then maybe she wouldn't set her students up the best possible way for them to succeed. And come on, artists, like, just think of this is how I think about it. You're robbing me of the opportunity to buy new stuff and to play with more materials. That's one of my favorite things about joining a workshop is, ooh, what's on the list that I don't have yet that I get to learn to play with, right? So that's me. And sometimes I've been in situations where I'm just like, oh God, I can't afford all this. So I take another tack, all right? Here's another one. Scott, another member of Growth Studio, had set a boundary with a charity request. And instead of attacking himself for saying no, he trusted his judgment and stayed curious about what that boundary was protecting. And what it was his energy for his actual art practice and some of the work that he does with other artists. right? So he was able to stay curious about that instead of feeling guilty or feeling bad for saying no. He was able to start recognizing, like, wait a second, there's an opportunity cost to this that I'm not willing to pay. Building this curiosity muscle is a practice, and it starts with awareness, noticing when that self-attack happens, and then pausing and asking yourself, what would I say to a friend of mine in this situation? Or what would I say to a student of mine in this situation? Because I guarantee that you will be kinder and more constructive with them than you are with yourself. Because for some reason, that's just how we roll. So opening up that conversation and noticing that is super, super important because it really shows you how aggressive you are being with yourself. We need to develop specific alternative language patterns. This is the actual retraining of our internal dialogue that I'm talking about here. And here's what's magical about this. When you create an internal environment free of microaggressions, your studio becomes the safest place to take creative risks. And that changes everything about what you're willing to attempt. I'm seeing this transformation happen with artists in Grow Studio. When they stop punishing themselves for exploration, they start creating work that's more authentic, it's more bold, and it's truly, truly their own work. So how do we actually implement this? I want to give you some concrete practices that come directly from artists that I work with in Grow Studio, because I love to give you practical, tactical tips. First off, we're going to start with a daily practice. Catch one moment of self-aggression per day and then just reframe it with curiosity instead. That's it. One moment. Earlier, I said that I kind of taken this idea and rolled with it inside Grow Studio. We're doing this thing that I'm calling the Trust Challenge, which is basically a painting a day for 30 days. But the paintings themselves are byproducts of the practice of being kind to yourself as you're doing this challenge, right? So this is part of what my 30-day challenges are designed to train is this idea. So what you can do is just catch yourself one moment of self-aggression per day and then just be very curious about it. So here's the thing, we have so many of these sort of like micro self-aggression moments that it's really easy to overlook them. A really good example is one of the artists in Grow Studio. When we first started talking about doing this challenge, she was so excited. Like she was completely amped. She's like, this is going to be so much fun. We're all doing it together. We have multiple live calls every week where she can get the support that she needs as she's going through it. It's kind of like it just creates this massive upward cycle. And so she was super, super excited about it. And I think, I think I came up with the idea on a Monday, and then on Wednesday made it a little bit more concrete. And then Friday, I was like, okay, we're going to start this on Monday. Here's all the parameters. Use this weekend, right, to get any supplies you need together. So she's super excited about this. And then over the weekend, she started gathering her materials together, and she just started feeling really like this, I can't do this, basically, right? Like this isn't going to work. I can't do it. This isn't it. And on Monday, she's amazing. She came and she said, hey, this is what happened over the weekend. And I just kind of wanted to walk through it. And what turned out is that she hated the materials that she was using. And so our practical solution for that was like, okay, so if it's that, then and part of it also was this kind of sensation, this back and forth, and this is so common. I mean, so many of us experiences this, right? Where it's this super excited about the creative part of it and really wanting to explore and really kind of like leaning into this idea of like, oh my gosh, if I do this for 30 days and I really lean into experimenting, for example, that was one of the tracks that I give where you do something where you're playing with the materials and you're just playing and having fun, and you're doing that every day for 30 days, right? And then she has this other side of her that like kind of wants to know what's going on. So there's this other side that likes structure and stability and control. And so we had this really beautiful conversation about it, but where we landed with it was like, hey, let's give that part of you that has the need for feeling control and needing structure. Let's show it how there is structure in this already, right? So you can use the same size canvases every time. You're using familiar materials. You're using very predictable setups, right? You are deciding ahead of time on these particular things about the way that you're executing this challenge. And so she went from, at first, like, I hate these materials. They remind me of like this project that I didn't like doing. It's the size, and she's painting over some old works that were from that project. And it just was just enough to reframe it for her so that she was able to see like, okay, yeah, the part of me that really wants to play has this challenge to really dive into that, to really experiment and be childlike and be fresh, et cetera, et cetera. And the part that wants stability and control, we're just going to remind it that like, these are the ways in which we know what is going to happen. These are the ways in which, these are the constraints. Let's put it that way. These are the guardrails for how this project is going to go, right? So again, like, these are these micro moments of being, on the one hand, super excited about doing this. And then there's this moment, there's this other voice that comes in that just is like, this isn't going to work. This is a dumb idea. I can't do this. It'll be great for everybody else, but not for me, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I'm saying blah, 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 not to dismiss that feeling or that voice that we all sometimes have. It's just that voice, when we're not aware of it, can get really, really aggressive. Okay, so that's an example from Cece. Another thing that came up with this concept of really wanting to do something and then having this other voice come in and saying, no, you're going to mess it up, or no, this isn't going to work, or it's too hard, or it's too this, or it's too that. Part of what I offered is, one of the keys is making decision ahead of time so that your creative brain doesn't have to work so hard on things that just genuinely aren't that important during your painting time. So in order to optimize this so that everybody could participate and not have it be so difficult, is optimizing the choices ahead of time so that when it's time for you to create, you're not having to make the same decisions over and over again. So what that looks like is, what am I going to paint? What colors am I going to use? What about this? What about that? Right? So for each person, we kind of came up with a different structure for that so that they have freedom and they're not making the same decisions over and over again. One of the methods that I offered to somebody was coming up with 6 to 10 subjects or 6 to 10 color combination, and then just rolling the dice to choose her subjects. So assigning a number to a color combination and then just rolling the dice and being like, okay, today it's blue, or whatever that ends up, right? Just to avoid decision fatigue within the project, because that's another way that we're just constantly showing ourselves over and over again that I can figure out fun and creative ways to do this so that when that voice comes up, it doesn't have as much power. So if you want to practice any of this and think about practice this idea of catching yourself in that moment, try this during your next painting session. Set an intention before you start. So that might look like, I'm here to explore. I'm not here to be perfect. And when things go wrong, and they will, you can pause and breathe before you react internally and ask yourself, what is this teaching me here? Or you ground yourself and just bring yourself back into presence. So like I said, we're all doing this together. And one of the things that I'm working on is this concept of taking like really complex subjects and playing with kind of chaos versus calmness is kind of like my theme for it. And so far, there's kind of 2 subject matters that I'm bouncing back and forth between. One of them is In the lot next to my house, there's just overgrown trees and brush. That's just this mesh, this cacophony of stuff, which I think is just really rich source to draw from. And then I also, inside, I have houseplants that I'm playing with. And so I've given myself 30 minutes every day to do the piece. And what I noticed, I think it was this morning, I sat down and I started drawing this really complex overlapping plants in my house. And I was paying attention to the negative space. So I was drawing the negative space, not the actual plant. And to do that, I'm really focusing, and I'm also retraining, I guess, my mind to compress the foreground and the background into a single shape when necessary. So it requires a lot of careful attention, a lot of looking at the exact negative shape and not getting distracted by the plant itself. And I'm doing this, and 10 minutes in, and I have this little 2-inch by 2-inch drawing. And there was a moment where I was like, oh my God, you need to figure out how to draw faster. And that was the moment where I realized, it was this is a moment of microaggression. I was kind of like, you need to learn how to draw faster. You this is tiny for 10 minutes. You've got what are you going to do every day? Right. And see how that just starts to add up, where it's like, this is too small. You're too slow. And then my brain immediately wanted to cycle into how I wasn't going to be able to do this. I wouldn't finish it. And I have to finish it because I'm I'm in charge of all this. This is my program. This is my idea. Right. And all of these thoughts just flooded in. And it took me longer to tell you for it to actually happen, because it's like that. It happens so fast and all at once. But I've been practicing this, and I have been working on this for years. And what I want to tell you about that is, even though I've been practicing this and working on this for years, it's still going to happen. But the difference is I noticed it almost immediately. And then I was able to recognize that I was having a microaggression, right? I was at the beginning of a spiral. So that's the first thing, is recognizing it. Second, then I grounded myself. So deep breaths and a couple other techniques that I use. And then I went back to, why am I doing this in the first place? Not the challenge. Why am I doing this drawing? Why did I choose this thing? And so all the reasons. And that's what regrounded me. That's what got me back to, the place of, okay, this is why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it to impress people. I'm not doing it to prove anything to anyone. I'm doing it because I chose this. And I'm excited about this, and it's something that I really want to play with. And then I had to remind myself of my own challenge, which is, it's not about creating amazing drawings or paintings or anything like that. It's just getting lost in an idea and allowing yourself to move through that idea with the goal, if there's a goal, of creating trust within yourself. So what can I do in that moment to create trust, right? So for me, that's what it was, is reminding myself why I was doing this, reminding myself that no matter what happens, I have my own back, that there will be no microaggressions, and that I could scratch over the whole entire thing, or I could stop right there and let that day's drawing be 2 inches by 3 inches or whatever it is, right? Instead of what I thought it was going to be. So again, there's that, the intent, this is what my vision was versus this is what was actually happening, right? And then once I create safety within myself and I can feel my body respond to that, then the obvious truth comes out, this is the safest place for me to do this. Right? I'm in no danger whatsoever. And I know I'm not being judged. I know I'm not being criticized. I know even if I posted my perception of the world's worst drawing, that, nobody's going to tell me that it's the most amazing drawing in the world, but they're going to support what I'm attempting to do. And that's the point. That is the point. Am I willing to do that 100 times? Or in this case, we're doing it 30 times. But am I willing to do that over and over and over again and not have that expected relief that we all think that we're going to get. What I guarantee you is that if I do this over and over and over again for the next 30 days, the next 60 days, the next 90 days, guarantee you, if I come at it with that intention, that my skill level for that particular thing that I'm focusing on will amplify 100%. Okay. So there was a little bit of a long example, but the point of me telling you that story really is we all do this all the time. And the more we're aware of it, the shorter those cycles of self-aggression are. And the more we trust ourselves, the more safety we create for ourselves. And that's how you have your own back. So during your painting sessions, set an intention before you start. I'm here to do this, not to be perfect. And when those things go wrong, you can ground yourself, pause, breathe before you react internally. Pay attention to how you share your work. This is huge. This is another thing that you could try. I would only do one of the things that I'm suggesting here, so I'm just giving you options. Another thing is to pay attention to how you share your work and notice if your language is apologetic. Practice neutral presentation. So here's what I worked on instead of, I know this isn't very good and I tried to do this, but this is what all screwed up, or this is why I couldn't do it. Neutrality to start with, if you have that habit. In last week's coaching call, I had to remind everybody that you cannot do this challenge wrong. There is literally no way to do a creative challenge incorrectly. But listen to how we think about our creative work. We're so convinced that there's a right way that we punish ourselves for exploring, or we punish ourselves for shifting things to make it a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more in our own language. And I'm going to give you one last practical tip. Came from that same conversation. You can also set yourself up for success the way that some of the artists in Growth Studio are doing. Leslie, for example, had this really interesting insight. She was like, okay, I'm going to set myself up for success. So she used paint that was already mixed because she was working on a painting the day before. So she decided, I'm just going to use the same paint that I already have mixed. It'll make things faster. And then she worked from a familiar subject and gave herself a manageable amount of time limit. And she was just speed painting, and she created this. I mean, I think it was a really beautiful piece. But what she realized was, that's not how I want to do it, because some of the paint that was left over my palette was really sticky and kind of icky, and it created this tension in the work that I didn't want there, right? So that's an example, and she did it so beautifully. She's just like, yeah, this is what happened, and then I realized it, rather than what often happens. So within that safe structure, now she can challenge herself by adding new materials that she usually avoided, because she's got this safe place to explore. So I wanted to share these stories with you. I wanted to tell you what we're doing inside of Growth Studio, because you might want to take a part of this and bring it into your own studio, or you might just start to notice how and where you are being aggressive towards yourself, how and when you sort of tend to fall into that trap. Even if you just start becoming aware of when you are being self-aggressive, it's going to transform your practice, because that creates just a little bit of a space for you to create something different when you recognize that that's what you're doing, versus hearing that aggressive voice or thinking that aggressive thought and internal and believing that that's true, that's reality, that's just a fact and not a thought that is floating through your head at that moment. Just that is transformational. And the transformation happens when you start treating yourself the way that you would treat a student or a friend or somebody that you deeply cared about. And what I would love more than anything else is if the person that you deeply care about is yourself. There was a moment in one of our calls where I asked another one of our members, Braylee, what she would say to a student who was struggling with the same issues that she had brought up and we were talking about. And the answer that she gave was completely different from how she talked to herself. It was so much kinder, so much more constructive, so much more encouraging. And this is a person who has grown so much in the time that I've worked with her. It is amazing. I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of everybody in Growth Studio, but Braylee is so much more aware of how she talks to herself and how she treats herself. And it is just such a beautiful thing because it is showing in her work, and it's a beautiful thing. These might seem like really small changes, but they add up to a complete transformation in your creative relationship with yourself. And I'm going to end this here. I think this might be all that I have to say about this. But one thing I really want you to know is that if you're practicing this, what you're doing is you are literally rewiring years of internal criticism. And so I want you to be gentle with yourself throughout this whole process. Because when you make this shift, it changes everything in your studio, and it definitely ripples out into the rest of your life. Because you're more willing to experiment. Your studio sessions get longer and more enjoyable because you're not walking on creative eggshells. You develop a different relationship with failure. It becomes information instead of evidence against you. And your work becomes more authentic because you're not constantly self-censoring. You're allowing yourself to explore the ideas that you want to explore. And that is huge. It is absolutely huge. Here's the deepest connection. I know I said I was going to wrap this up, but I promise I am right now. Self-aggression erodes your trust in your creative judgment. And every time you attack yourself for a creative choice, you're essentially saying to yourself, I cannot trust myself to handle whatever happens. And that is not true. Curiosity, on the other hand, is going to build your confidence up. It's going to build your confidence in your ability to handle any outcome. And it creates this upward spiral instead of a down one. And that's what I want for you. When you trust yourself to stay curious rather than critical, you will start making bolder choices, and you will stop playing it safe, and you will create the work that actually represents who you are as an artist. Okay, promise, that's it. I think this ended up being a long episode because I kind of got on a roll with a couple of things. But your studio should be the safest place for you to take creative risks, and you have the power to create that. Okay, that's what I have for you today. Have a beautiful week, and I will talk to you soon.